It's Tuesday, it's the 8th of July. You're watching ARIRANG Korea's only global network. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Gun-young. With Preston Park's post-ferry disaster government restructuring plan and public sector reforms delayed by cabinet appointment failures and a parliamentary deadlock over related bills, the Prime Minister of this country has vowed to set up a national reform committee. He was addressing the public earlier this Tuesday, where Prime Minister Chung Hong-won said both the government and civilians will take part in the committee, which will gather public opinion on reforms, ways to improve national safety, and rooting out social corruption. Chung then said a master plan on safety innovation will be finalized by next February. Promising to set up a framework for public reform within the month, the Prime Minister also urged the Parliament to support an immediate passage of government restructuring and reform-related bills. Shifting gears, the United States and China will meet for 2 days of bilateral talks starting tomorrow in the Chinese capital. The annual meeting is aimed at boosting bilateral cooperation, but this year, the two global powers may have to focus on more contentious issue. Here's our Hwang Sang-hee with this report.
As U.S. Secretary John Kerry heads for Beijing for the annual U.S.-China Strategic and Economic Dialogue, Washington said Monday that two countries will address a handful of pressing bilateral and global issues.
Our two countries will exchange views and forge progress on global, regional, and bilateral challenges, including pressing issues related to Ukraine, Afghanistan, Iran, the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and maritime disputes.
State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki called the two-day meeting an important component of U.S. efforts to bolster relations with China. But more contentious topics will likely outweigh talks on cooperation. One of the most important issues for Washington could be China's alleged cyber theft of U.S. corporate secrets. In May, the U.S. indicted 5 Chinese military officers for allegedly hacking into U.S. companies to steal their trade secrets. The two also remain far apart on North Korea's nuclear ambitions, with Beijing calling for a swift resumption of dialogue, while Washington seeks more pressure by China on the north. Japan's resurgent nationalism and China's push to expand its maritime control are other potential issues for dispute. While any breakthroughs are unlikely this week, experts say the efforts by the U.S. and China to continue discussions should be taken positively by neighboring countries like South Korea. But at the same time, they say Seoul must stay alert on whether the two global powers will use the issue of North Korea's nuclear program as a negotiating card at their bilateral talks. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
Well, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un limped onto the stage as he attended a mass memorial service commemorating the 20th anniversary of the death of his grandfather and North Korea's founder, Kim Il-sung. Well, Tuesday's memorial was broadcast live by its state media, and the young Kim was shown walking with a visible limp. Well, the reason for the limp has not been known, but it is quite a rare display of weakness in a country whose leaders are considered semi-divine. Senior military officers and party officials also attended the ceremony, but Kim Kyung-hee, who is the daughter of Kim Il-sung and aunt of Kim Jong-un, was not present. And also absent was Kim Yang-gun, who is in charge of North Korea's cross-border affairs. And speaking of which, it's with this symbolic anniversary that North Korea is trying to extract some much-needed cash from a pro-Pyongyang Federation of Koreans living in Japan. Our Kim Min-ji has this report.
North Korea's main national daily Nodong Shinmun has published a rare article praising a pro-Pyongyang Federation of Koreans living in Japan known as Jocheongnyeon. Titled The Legend of Love Engraved in the History of North Koreans in Japan, the article says late leader Kim Il-sung showed great interest in the planning and construction of the Mangyongbong, a vessel that was used to carry North Koreans and Federation officials to Pyongyang. It added that Kim said officials from the Federation were revolution comrades. The move comes a matter of days after Japan lifted some sanctions imposed on the North. Pyongyang seems to be laying the groundwork to get financial support from the Federation again, now that regulations on the transfer of money have been eased. Around 300,000 US dollars can be remitted to North Korea without prior approval from the Japanese government. However, there are voices of concern emanating out of the Federation. Japanese media reports say some businessmen within the Federation dread becoming the source of funding for North Korea. It seems their woes will deepen, though, as North Korea continues to cozy up with Japan. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Now on to Pope Francis. He has offered his deepest apologies to the people who suffered sexual abuse at the hands of Catholic priests. However, many say his apology just came too late and it doesn't go far enough. Our Shin Se-min explains.
Pope Francis has won widespread praise for his humble personal style and his efforts to reform the Vatican bureaucracy, but his handling of the sex abuse issue has brought him some sharp criticism. He attempted to address it in a private morning mass on Monday with 6 adult victims from Ireland, Britain, and Germany who were sexually abused by Catholic clerks. During the meeting, Pope Francis pledged that any bishop who fails in his responsibility to protect minors will be held accountable and begged forgiveness from the victims.
It causes me distress and pain at the fact that some priests and bishops, by sexually abusing minors, violated their innocence and their own priestly vocation. It goes beyond just despicable actions. It is like a sacrilegious cult.
But this is the first such meeting in a 16-month-old pontificate, prompting some advocates for abuse victims to argue that the Vatican still has done too little to create or prevent an accountable system for sex abuse victims. And in contrast to his predecessors, Pope John Paul II and Benedict, who met with victims on several occasions, Pope Francis' first meeting was seen by critics as insensitive given his compassionate nature. However, the director of U.S. Victims Advocacy Group, Bishops Accountability, praised the pontiff for the meeting, saying it was a positive and a necessary step. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Now, Korea's new finance minister designate Jongun has promised all-out efforts to boost domestic demand to lead the economy out of a low-growth trap. He was speaking at his confirmation hearing today. Che said he wants to make it easier for home buyers to get mortgage loans from banks. But this is also raising concerns. Here's our Kim Myung-gil.
Finance Minister nominee Jongun says his initial focus will be removing red tape and other restrictions that make it difficult for consumers to buy a home. In his parliamentary confirmation hearing Tuesday, Che said one area he would attend to urgently is easing what he called outdated restrictions on housing loans.
Debt-to-income and loan-to-value rules that have limited purchases have been in place for more than a decade, and there have been reasonable efforts to improve the system. We will come up with more reasonable measures.
Che, who will also be a deputy prime minister if he is confirmed, said the government is requiring banks to excessively limit housing loans as it has failed to change regulations written more than 10 years ago when there were worries about property market bubbles. Adopted during the housing market boom, the rules strictly restrict the size of a home loan that can be given to home buyers. But the nominee did not say how he would bring the nation's rapidly growing household debt problem under control. Critics say it will only get worse if loan restrictions are eased. Che said the need to boost domestic demand has become more urgent as the April ferry disaster prompted many consumers to refrain from leisure activities, thereby slowing the recovery.
The economic team will place its focus on boosting domestic demand through increasing household income and improving consumer sentiment.
The nominee also said he was opposed to tax hikes aimed at making up for a revenue shortfall, adding that revenues should be raised by boosting economic activities, not by raising taxes. In particular, Che cautioned against raising corporate tax rates as a hike could damage investment and the economic recovery. Che also said when it comes to extra budget, he said the government would take a comprehensive approach looking into the economic conditions and that the government is in the middle of crafting a budget plan for next year. Kim Myung-gil, ARIRANG News.
And right on to that point, Korea's household debt has hit another fresh high. According to the Bank of Korea Tuesday, the amount of household loans extended by financial institutions stood at 699 trillion won, roughly $692 billion as of the end of May. This figure is up $3.8 trillion from the previous month. And although the figure has reached new highs for 4 straight months now, this marks a slower growth rate than April. The central bank attributed the slower growth to a lower number of home purchases in May. Now moving on to another big story making headlines. Samsung Electronics released its estimated operating profit for the second quarter on this Tuesday, and it didn't make for a pretty reading. Profits fell below the psychologically significant 8 trillion won mark for the first time in 2 years. What could be the cause and what is expected to come? Our Na Hyun-kyung explains.
Industry insiders in Seoul are calling it an earnings shock. Samsung Electronics' second quarter earnings guidance stands at 7.2 trillion won, or just above $7 billion, falling 15% from the previous quarter and down a whopping 25% from the same period last year. The company attributed the lower-than-expected operating profit to a slowdown in the growth of the global smartphone market and a strong Korean currency.
Samsung had a hard time in high-end smartphone segment because Galaxy S5 was not sold well. Second, Samsung did not focus on mid and low-end smartphone market because of price down pressure from Chinese smartphone competitors.
Experts add if Samsung fails to beat off competition from Apple and Chinese manufacturers such as Xiaomi and Lenovo by the end of the year, the results will take a toll on the Korean economy as well, given that Samsung last year took up nearly 50% of the combined net profit generated by all listed companies in Korea. Samsung says the far from impressive numbers are hardly related to its ill chairman Lee Gun-hee, but with the second quarter profit hitting a 2-year low, investors are likely to put more pressure on the tech giant's management. Na Hyun-kyung, ARIRANG News.
Well, the financial health of some Korean conglomerates that are already in debt is worsening. The average debt-to-equity ratio of Hanjin Transportation, Kumho Asiana, and Hyundai Group and 7 other conglomerates rose by nearly 20 percentage points last year to more than 260% in December. Chaebol.com, a research firm following Korean conglomerates, said the debts of some shipping units that belong to Hanjin Transportation and Hyundai Group were more than 10 times higher than their equity. Well, that's not to confuse Hyundai Group with Hyundai Motor Group. There are 2 different entities here. The construction units of some of the conglomerates were particularly in bad shape. Hundreds of drivers in Korea have launched a class action lawsuit against some of the country's biggest automakers. This after the Korean government announced last month that 2 local automakers, including Hyundai Motor and 4 foreign brands, overstated the gas mileage of some of their vehicles. Here's our Hwang Ji-hye.
Consumers who bought cars with overstated gas mileage are taking some of Korea's biggest automakers to court. As of now, around 1,700 people have joined a class action lawsuit. The overwhelming majority are owners of Hyundai Motor's 2013 Santa Fe SUV, taking up almost 90% of claims. Drivers who own Sangyong Motor's 2013 Corando SUV and some imported cars have also joined the lawsuit. A lawyer working on behalf of the drivers says he expects the number of plaintiffs to rise and eventually top 3,000.
We believe automakers have a warranty responsibility since the vehicles have a flaw in a key factor that measures performance. And the Land Ministry has already verified that there is a problem with the vehicles.
The plaintiffs are seeking between $650 to $3,000 each in compensation. The damages they claim include factors like the extra money they've spent on gas and mental stress. But with the Land Ministry and Industry Ministry divided over the correct way of calculating fuel efficiency, pundits are expecting a fierce legal battle. Even if the plaintiffs win, it doesn't mean all of the 110,000 people who own the models in question will receive compensation. Only those who filed a claim will receive a payout. 황지혜, 아리랑 뉴스.
Well, 'tis the season to go traveling, and this new revision might help you take that extra burden off when drawing up your travel budget. Those looking to buy flight tickets and travel products here in Korea have had to experience some inconveniences, as most travel agencies and airline ticket reservation sites currently advertise prices that do not include tax and extra charges to, I suppose, entice more customers. Well, that practice will be no more. The Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport said today that the cabinet has passed a revision to the nation's Aviation Act that would require the total fare for travel products or airline tickets, including tax and extra charges, to be advertised starting July 15th. And Korean tech giant LG Electronics has started selling its G-Watch smartwatch both on and offline, online at the Google Play Store and offline at stores in a number of countries worldwide. The first Android-powered smartwatch will be available in 27 countries, including the US, Canada, France, and Italy. And you'll have a choice between black and white, and the watch boasts an always-on feature that allows the display lights to be activated at all times, which would probably make it easier for users to check the time. Well, G-Watch is compatible with smartphones running on Android OS version 4.3 or higher, and will retail for about $265 right here in Korea. As our Chi Myung-gil reported at the top of our broadcast, the nation's Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister designate Choi Kyung-hwan told lawmakers today that the current state of the Korean economy may require additional economic stimulus. Well, he also hinted at the possibility of cutting the country's economic growth forecast for this year. Let's take an in-depth look, and for that, we are joined live in the studio by our regular contributor, Dr. Kim Byung-ju. Welcome back, Dr. Kim.
Thank you.
Now, so during and leading up to his confirmation hearing at the National Assembly, the Finance Minister nominee, Choi Kyung-hwan, said he supported various economic stimulus for the Korean economy right now. So what do we know so far on this?
Well, first of all, his words today indicating that he would like to support the idea of the introduction of another supplementary budget in order to boost the economy. That's one thing. And also, some of the analysts who are reading his submission to the National Assembly for his confirmation, according to different reports, were even reading indications, not only those fiscal act, but also even he supports the idea of the monetary action to further cutting of the Korea's interest rate in order to boost the economy as a whole. And this, once again, according to the critics, is kind of return of the old phrase that's so often used in Korean economic policy making circle, reviving the economy. And some people are saying, well, this seems to be making sense because for the past few months, particularly April and May, the production statistics show a slight decrease, 0.4 decrease month to month in April, and also about the 3 point or so decrease in May statistics as well, month to month. And they're saying overall, as you mentioned, the government is expected to downgrade a little bit of its outlook for the growth following the actions taken by KDI and as well as private research institutes here, cutting down or downgrading the outlook for the growth entire year here. So those people who support Choi Kyung-hwan's idea are all saying this seems to be making sense to make this kind of preemptive or preventive measures in order to prevent a slowdown of the economy. But at the same time, those among us who are much more cautious about overall the management of economic policy are concerned whether this is more of a politically too sensitive, oversensitivity in terms of responding to political pressure to the government that seems to be losing its popularity.
Well, this, of course, as he said himself, is his personal view of the Korean economy.
Right.
Now, how does it compare with the actual figures that we're getting?
Choi Kyung-won and his supporters are often talking about these monthly figures that, as I mentioned. But let's bring up the quarterly figures. In this story, we are seeing kind of very different story here. This is the quarterly figures, as you can see on the screen, that often those among us who are cautious about these kind of moves often would like to use. This shows better, the way I see it, the overall trend here. And those people who are supporting Choi Kyung-won's view are saying is there is a chance that the second quarter we might see heading down a little bit from here, what seems to be an obvious and clear upswing here. So that's what they're saying. And once again, those of us who are watching the quarterly move here are saying, well, look, the economy has been rebounding here. So what are you talking about slowing down? So the debate will be continuing with regard to this particular graph here.
Now, if we look beyond the aggregate GDP growth, how does the overall trend look like? For instance, in terms of production and service output?
Well, let's bring up those numbers here. Once again, the quarterly figures may tell us slightly different stories here. Let's bring up those figures. So we were comparing the manufacturing production and service output here. And as you can see, even though there was just a little bit downwards move in the manufacturing output side during the first quarter, we cannot say that we are facing downward move here at all. And the service output, slight downturn here, first quarter as well, but it's not strong enough evidence to say we are facing downwards. So once again, those of us who are more conservative about this kind of reading the numbers are saying, well, there is a possibility that the government, if Choi Kyung-won takes the economic team, there's a possibility for a premature move in terms of thinking and talking about this kind of fiscal as well as even monetary actions.
Right. So I suppose that little downgrade there isn't enough to bring up these stimulus.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Now, what about the way consumers are spending right now and how the companies, Korean business communities, is looking to the future?
Consumer spending is fine. Once again, let's see on the screen here. Consumer spending has been actually growing quite fast in terms of the quarterly figures here. Of course, a lot of people are saying as a result of the Seoul disaster, there will be an impact. But I think that even the latest numbers seem to be showing that consumer spending itself is not that much affected. And facility investment here, just a little bit of downturn here. But once again, same story applies as to the previous graphs here. I don't think, and along with those among us who are conservative here, we see strong evidence that facility investment is heading downwards as well. So same story here.
So how would you assess the need for economic stimulus and even expansionary policies?
Well, let's be very clear about this. Choi Kyung-won and his supporters and those people who are talking about the need for preemptive and preventive boosting of the economy, their argument has their merits. They do have their numbers on their side in terms of monthly figures and all that. And so when they say, let's move preemptively, let's prevent this any kind of downward at this point because there may be a negative impact resulting from the Seoul disaster, okay, fine. I think that argument itself stands, but there's a question whether we should all agree with that argument at all here, because as I said, we have to be cautious about the longer term overall trend. And as we saw in terms of the quarterly figures, we seem to be still on the upswing, and that seems to be what Bank of Korea has maintained as its position until about a month ago, for instance. So I think rather than the new economic chief coming in talking actively about this kind of active preventive measures, I think he has to be a little bit more cautious. And in the minds of critics, especially when he's talking about not only fiscal action, spending more when we have this tight tax revenue situation here in Korea, that's a cause of concern, one. And the other one is, of course, monetary policy. We have 2.25% as the current rate right now. If we go even further, what's going to happen if we face a real crisis? Do we have a room to move even further? So that's why we have to be very careful about it. And this Thursday, 2 days from today, the Monetary Policy Committee will make a decision. They face big-time pressure at this point, but however, the conservatives are hoping that they will be very much cautious about it And adding to that, of course, the political critics are saying Choi Kyung-won is one of the Park's men, and he could have a tendency to be oversensitive about this, political, swings, mood swings, and all that. When the president is losing her popularity, when he may face a great need to talk about this boosting economy right at this point. So economists are a little bit nervous about that.
Right, and we cannot, disregard the another fresh high Korea's household debt.
Right.
So that's another very big
very
concern.
important point. Yeah.
Right. All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
And that is your business today on this Tuesday. Thank you for watching. And do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.